Welcome to the sixth game of the World Chess Championship match being played in Singapore between the reigning world champion Ding Liren from China and Domraju Gukesh from India. In this game, Ding starts with white pieces, and at this stage of the match, both the players are evenly tied with 2.5 points each after 5 rounds. So Ding is white. He played d4 in the first move. Well, it's already a minor surprise because in the second game of the match, where Ding played with white pieces for the first time, he started with e4. And in the fourth game of the match, where Ding played with white pieces for the second time, he started with knight f3. And the third time he gets white, he starts with d4. So in all the three games with white, Ding played different moves. Well, here Gukesh played knight f6, which is a normal move, developing move, controlling e4. And here Ding, instead of the more common c4 or knight f3, he played the move bishop f4 at this point. Now, bishop f4 is called the London system, where white plays very modestly in the openings. He usually puts his pawn on e3, c3, and places his bishop outside the pawn wall. This is a sort of mirror version of Slav defense with black. We won't go into the details of the opening, but I would like to share that about 2 decades ago, this move was considered to be a sideline. Not many players used to play the London system, but nowadays it has become one of the main lines of chess. Almost all the players employ this system or play London system from time to time. So one of the appeals behind London system is it is easy to learn and the position remains quite solid without risk. Ding played bishop f4, and it's very interesting to recall that in the previous World Championship cycle, where Ding had defeated the Russian player Jan Nepomniachtchi, he played exactly this move in the sixth game, and he managed to win that game. So because of that memory, maybe Ding repeated the same move in the sixth game. And here, Gukesh played d5, Ding played e3, Gukesh played e6. Well, there are many different systems which black can employ against the London system, and the move Gukesh plays is the simplest of all defenses. White played knight f3, black played c5, and white played c3. Well, it is at this point we can, for the players who plays d4 with white, this position may seem very familiar, but only with color reversed. Imagine black is white and the setup white employs here is employed by black in the Slav defense. Okay, after c3, black played bishop d6, developing his piece and challenging white's active bishop. At this stage, white has quite a few alternatives. He usually goes bishop g3. He avoids exchange on f4. He doesn't want to double the pawn with e pawn going to f4. Rather, bishop g3 is a very common move, inviting black to capture the bishop so that the h file opens up for the rook. Usually, black will not capture on g3, and a typical game or a typical trap which I would like to share is knight c6, knight bd2, both the players developing harmoniously, bishop d3. Well, this is the starting position of the London system. Traditionally, the games used to go like this. Here, both the players would complete their development and would like to typically activate their rooks. So white could try e4 break, either directly or after exchange of d and c pawns. White usually goes e4 after castling and opens the central files. Whereas black tries for e5 to open up to activate the c8 bishop and of course activate the rooks and place the rooks favorably on the files. So a typical trap from this position goes where black plays logically. He plays queen e7 with the intention of playing e5, supporting e5, and white placing his knight on e5 so that black cannot push the pawn and free his position. One of the most natural moves here, knight d7, challenging the advanced knight with all these pieces, is actually a mistake. So those interested to solve positions can pause the video here and can work out how white can get advantage from this position. Well, the best move for white is the surprising move. He can exchange his e5 knight with a relatively passive looking knight on d7. Surprisingly, this is the best move, and it doesn't quite strike to an average player why this move should be so good. But after the exchange, the reason why white had taken on d7 is that he would like to exchange this bishop as well, forcing the queen to come here, and then he would like to capture this pawn as well. At this point, it seems that black has the advantage because he has an extra central pawn, and whatever edge or pull white has in the openings has disappeared. But now comes the point, the main reason why white had exchanged all these pieces. White suddenly has a sacrifice, bishop h7, giving away a bishop for a pawn to expose the king. Where are white's pieces to attack? Well, we'll soon learn how white exploits the exposed position of the king. First, he plays queen h5 check, the king goes back, and then he plays the surprising move knight e4. Since this pawn is pinned, that is why the pawn can't be taken. And when the queen moves, the knight lands on g5 with an undefendable threat of queen h7 check. Well, and if black tries to support the h7 square with his queen, white can cut off the diagonal and then follow up with queen h7 deadly check. All black can do is to move his rook away, but then white can capture the pawn and continue his deadly attack. Well, this is not how the game went. I just showed you an example of how tricky London system can be. Of course, players at the top, they know this trap and they won't fall into the trap. And that is why bishop d6 is played. And white, instead of playing in the traditional manner, he played bishop b5 check. Instead of placing the bishop on d3 so that it could attack on the king side, he went for bishop b5 check instead. Well, in this position with the bishop on f1, I would like to point out that Gukesh, who is playing with black pieces here, has some experience with white piece as well. He had played London system last year in 2023, and he lost to a grandmaster who is rated more than 200 ELOs below him. There, Gukesh started with knight bd2, and the player with black pieces, Suleimanli, he managed to defeat Gukesh with black pieces. So this is a memory which Gukesh has in the London system, and that's why now he's dealing this position from black's point of view. White played bishop b5 check. Now this move, bishop b5, became popular thanks to Magnus Carlsen. He has employed this on many occasions, and the idea behind this move is totally different from what London system was meant to be. The original plan of London system is to place the bishop on the best diagonal, but well, since London system is played so often, black has found many different ways to neutralize white's advantage. White has switched to alternate plans, and bishop b5 basically plans for a slight advantage in the endgame. After knight c6, Note that the other moves like bishop d7 or queen or knight d7 are not possible because white could capture the bishop on d6, which would be left, well, undefended, because after bishop d7, the defense is blocked, so we can capture the bishop. Knight c6 is by and large forced move here, after which white played bishop c6. Surprisingly, he exchanged his bishop for a knight and a strong bishop for this knight. But white has a deep idea behind this move, and that is, after the exchange of bishops, white is heading towards an endgame formation where after queen a5, queen a4, he is heading for a position where black would be left with this bishop against white's better knight. The knight would be typically angling for c5 square. So in this type of positions, white would dream to exchange these knights and would have this knight placed on c5 from where it can't be evicted by any pawn. So this is a permanent outpost for a knight against a relatively bad bishop, which is stuck behind its own pawns. So this is white's idea. He goes for early exchanges. He put his queen on a3, and after castles, Ding played a very nice move, that is queen a3, putting pressure on this pawn. Because of bishop c6, which white played earlier, black cannot play b6 to support this pawn. The pawn has been doubled, and this is one of the drawbacks of having a double pawn. This pawn is immobile. Instead, had it been here, it could have moved. Okay, interestingly, in this position, Ding had faced this position with black pieces. Paradoxically, Gukesh had played the London system with white last year, and Ding had played the London system, had faced the London system with black against Magnus Carlsen. And Magnus, instead of queen a3, castled, and Gukesh played Ding played very instructively here. He first exchanged the pawns, and before white could block it on c5, he played c5 instead. And after rook c1, he played c4, and white did not have any strong outpost on c5. So this position was quite decent for Ding. So this is how Ding had played with black. So instead of castling, when he is white, he played queen a3, perhaps the best move in this position, pinning the pawn, attacking the pawn. Black played knight e4, defending the pawn and posting the knight to a good square. And white played knight f d2, slightly surprising. Well, maybe knight b d2 looks more normal, but after the exchange, the pawn would attack this knight. Therefore, white played knight f d2. White is threatening to remove the defender of c-pawn and capture the c-pawn. Here, black went for the aggressive move e5, opening the diagonal for the bishop and exploiting the fact that white's king is still stuck in the center and he has not yet completed his development. So e5, opening the e line and opening the diagonal for the bishop. But of course, this move entails a pawn sacrifice, a temporary pawn sacrifice. White played knight e4 and captured the c-pawn as per his plan. Well, one of the reasons why e5 was played was to open lines for the rook, diagonals for the bishop, and rank for the queen. So e5 was a very useful move. Black shifted the queen to g6, attacking the g-pawn. If white castles to defend the g-pawn, black would play bishop h3. This is a typical move where he attacks the g2 pawn, he threatens checkmate, and since the pawn is pinned, the only way how it can be defended is by playing g3, after which white would lose the exchange. So this is how black was threatening to win. But of course, white will not castle. He played knight d2. Black captured the pawn on g2, attacking the rook. White castled, supporting the rook and creating a dynamic imbalance. Now, white has a line to attack against opponent king, and black also has lines to attack against the king. So we have a very dynamic imbalance. Both sides, well, the pawns are equal, Here, black played queen f2, moving one pawn ahead, threatening e3. Now, in this position, believe it or not, we are following opening theory till this point. Previously, a game was played by a very strong Armenian grandmaster who is now settled in USA, Levon Aronian, against uh, another player who is settled in USA but originally belongs to Cuba, Dominguez. Here, Aronian against Dominguez went rook de1, supporting the e pawn. And although black is a pawn up, white is threatening to somehow harass the queen, and he is threatening e pawn as well as c6 pawn. But black played rook b8. Well, this was a very nice move from black, after which white decided to repeat moves by attacking the queen and attacking the queen again. The queen moved here, and he kept on attacking the queen and repeating moves. The game ended in a draw. Instead, after rook b8, had white captured the e5 pawn or played a neutral move, black would have played a brilliant move and won the game. So you may pause the video and you may try to find the move by yourself. Okay, here black would have played rook takes b2, sacrificing a rook. After king b2, he wins back the knight, so he's an exchange down. And if the king goes to, there's a check. If the king goes to a1, black would capture c3 with a check. If the king goes to b1, black would place his bishop on d3 and checkmate. For instance, bishop d3, bishop a6, and against a normal move like, say, rook g1, threatening checkmate, black is the player who will checkmate white first by checking and playing queen c3. So this was a very nice example how the game could have gone had white played rook de1 and then missed black's threat after rook b8. But in this game, world champion Ding plays de5. He equalizes the pawn and supports the e pawn with his queen. And Gukesh went rook b8. White went knight c4. So he supports the e pawn, overprotects the e pawn and brings the knight to a nice square from where it can jump to squares like d6, supports the e pawn. Black played bishop e6, planning to exchange the very strong knight. And of course, at this point, black is threatening queen b2 checkmate after exchanging on c4. So white played rook d2, attacking the queen, defending against b2. Black went queen f3, moving the queen away and attacking the rook. White went rook e1, defending his own rook and overprotecting the e pawn, so that after bishop c4, queen c4, the e pawn is supported. Here black does exchange the knight for the bishop, and we have moved to an endgame position with queen and two rooks without any minor pieces. Well, the position is quite drawish, but both sides have to be quite careful because queen and rooks, if they become active, they can be a very powerful force. After queen f5 attacking e5, white captured c6, black captured on e5, and we have a position with a dynamic imbalance. Everything is equal, but white has two extra pawns on the queen side. Black has two extra pawns on the king side. Here, the typical plan for both sides would be to advance their own majority and create attack with the pawns. So basically, the idea will be to bring the pawns close to promotion, force the opponent pieces to defense, and then winning by attacking. Well, finding a second weakness perhaps and attacking the other side. So let's see how the game proceeds. White went queen d5, offering to exchange the queens. After queen d5, rook d5, White would have a minor advantage because his rooks are more active than black's. And it's easier for white to advance his queenside pawns than for black to advance his kingside pawns. For example, if black plays f5, c4, and if black advances his majority, then white would of course exchange. After rook f4, white could first support his pawns and then bring his king in the center to defend against the opponent pass pawn, and then perhaps exchange the rooks and start advancing his own pawns. So this would be much better for white. Therefore, after queen d5, black decided to not exchange the queens but preserve it for counterattack. White played queen d6, offering to exchange the queen again. And black escaped queen g5. He wants to preserve the queen so that he gets chances to counterattack. And white Liren repeated moves in this position. Well, it's slightly surprising that world champion, having a very small advantage in this position, did not try to convert the advantage or increase the advantage. Instead, he went for repetition of moves. And thanks to the fighting spirit of Gukesh, we could see further few moves. He went queen h4 at a time when queen e7 would have been a draw by threefold repetition. Black played queen h4. Well, black is attacking this rook. And well, the commentators during this game were of the same opinion that this was a mistake which can cost Gukesh very much, because he should have taken the draw because the position was not good. But thanks to his fighting spirit, he kept on playing. White played white played rook e d1. He moved his rook away, and black played g6. He's improving his position so that he can advance his pawns. White played queen e5. Perhaps he should have started advancing the pawns right away. c4. And both sides would have advanced their respective pawns. And I have a hunch that white is slightly better here. It's easier to play with white than black. A sample example is, well, if rook here, white can actually give up his queen for two rooks. And that may be slightly better for white, because by playing rook d2, he supports this pawn and also plans to play rook c2 and advance the pawns. Therefore, after c4, maybe Gukesh would not continue with rook d8, but rook c8 perhaps, and white can play b3 and gradually place his rooks favorably for the pawn advance. Okay, in this position, white played queen e5 instead of c4. So this is a move which also preserves some advantage, but well, Gukesh played rook be8. It's important to note that he did not play rook fe8 because he has to advance his kingside pawns. So rook be8 attacks the queen. When the queen moved, Ding again offered to exchange the queens, but this time on g3 square. This endgame is very instructive because we test the intuition of the best players of the world to check whether which exchange is favorable for white. See, after exchange of these pawns, these queens, the pawns are set in such a manner that it's difficult for black to create passed pawns. Okay, that's why queen g3 was played, and Gukesh avoided the exchange of queens again. He played queen h5. White played queen f4. So basically, this is a type of position where white is playing a sort of shadow boxing, is improving his positions before advancing the pawns. Black played queen a5, attacking this pawn on a2, and white defended it. Then black played queen b5. So black is making moves with his queen, trying to find weakness in the opponent camp. White played rook d4, attacking the pawn, and black suddenly played queen e2. If white captures on e4, after rook e4, queen e4, black could capture on h2 because that would be left undefended. White played rook 1 d2, attacking the queen, and black played queen f3. So we have seen the queen dancing all over the board and finally landing on a strong square. If queen f3, black could capture on f3 and suddenly open the line for his own rook. And this pawn on f3 can be very dangerous. Black can follow up with moves like f5, g5, g4 with good position. White played king c2 in this point. He could have played queen g5, avoiding the queen exchange, or even queen g3, offering to exchange the queen on the same g3 square we have seen previously. It's good for white. Surely black would play something apart from exchanging the queen here. But in this position, white played king c2 and black exchanged the queens. So after king c2 and queen exchange, it seems black has found a perfect way for counterplay. He played f5, supporting his passed pawn. White went h4, trying to break the chain of pawns. Black went e3. Now this rook went to e2 to block this passed pawn, and black played rook e7, preventing white's rook from coming to d7 and also preparing to double if necessary. White played king d3. White is surrounding the pawn, and for a brief while it looked white is doing quite good. He may capture this pawn and emerge as a player with material advantage. But black played rook fe8, defending the pawn, and white played h5 suddenly. His idea is to, well, exchange the pawns and create a small weakness on g6. But black captured the pawn. Well, the point behind gh5 is not only to win material, but to create counterplay based on this passed pawn on h5. Now, white will have the duty to not only blockade the e pawn, but also take care of the h pawn. White quickly went rook d5, attacking f5, and black played h4. Now, if it were black's move, he can advance h3 and h2. Since this rook cannot move, it has to guard against the e3 pawn. White may be in trouble. In this position, white captured on f5. Both white and black had calculated everything from this point. Black played rook d7 check, which is a good move because it pushes the king back. And now, in this position, black played a very good move with a very nice idea of creating counterplay. Well, this move is going to be very instructive. In endgames, you must activate your kings. So what Gukesh did is he played king g7 with the idea, well, white is actually, if it were white's move, white can easily capture this pawn and get some advantage. But after king g6, g7, if the rook goes on h5, the king could come further up attacking the rook. And if the rook captures pawn, the king can come further up. And although black is a pawn down, white has two extra pawns on the queen side. This king can enter into white's position, and it may be an advantage for black because this pawn on this passed pawn is much more dangerous than two pawns which white has on the queen side. So after king g7, it was the turn for white to be very careful. He cannot allow the opponent king to come up so easily. So he played rook g2 check. Now it is not too late to blunder. If black plays king h6, he will get checkmated by rook f6 and rook g5. So the only move for black is to go king h8, which Gukesh did. Now black is threatening e2 e1, so white had to blockade the pawn once again, and Gukesh once again brought his king up, threatening to move all the way up. And here Ding repeated the position. He played rook g2 check, king went back, Ding played rook e2, and Gukesh once again moved to king g7. We have a draw by threefold repetition. Well, it was an interesting game, although neither side had clear winning chances, but the game was quite interesting. And one notable factor was that in all the 6 games both sides have played so far, there has not been a single repetition of chess openings. All the 6 games have different openings. And what is noteworthy is that Gukesh, even if he has a slight disadvantage, he still plays for a win. So the fighting spirit of Gukesh is the highlight of this game. Tomorrow is the rest day. After 6 rounds, we shall be meeting again after the 7th round. Stay tuned and keep following our channel. Goodbye.